Welcome everyone to the very first Masterclass session for CareerTrackers Winter 2020 Program Day, being of course HR and diversity. Sorry if I'm just looking over at my screen a little bit, I'm just keeping my eye on anyone else wanting to be admitted. My name is Sharon Heiserman. I'm the Program Manager for CareerTrackers Queensland and Northern Territory team. Jay, are you in here? Sorry, I just saw someone try to get admitted and then they went away. Sorry. I am about to celebrate my 2-year anniversary with CareerTrackers next week, which is great. I grew up on Ku-ring-gai country in the northwestern suburbs of Sydney, and I currently live and work on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people in Brisbane. So I won't brag about our chilly winter weather up here. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia on which we all live, work and study, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. While I'm talking, if you're happy to share, I'd love to see you all pop into the chat section the details of your mob and the country on which you're currently working and studying. If you're happy to share that. Given prior to joining CareerTrackers, I spent 15 years in HR. I'm very excited personally to hear from our guest presenters today and to gain their insights into the profession. So before I introduce our presenters, I'll just give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. Our agenda, we're going to, just admitting some more people. We're going to be talking about why this profession is important and where it's going, barriers to success in the profession, ingredients for excellence in this profession, and how as a student you can accelerate your success. At the end of each section, I'll share some of your questions with our presenters. So please put your questions in the chat section. After our presenters have introduced themselves, I'll close down the shared chat. So all the questions will just come to me, just to keep the distractions to a minimum. So questions aren't popping up as our presenters are speaking. I would like to now introduce you to our presenters for today. Our first presenter is Sonia Harvey, who's currently the Aboriginal Participation Advisor for BP Australia, role she's held for the past year. I will let Sonia tell her own story, but as part of her current role, Sonia helps guide and support CareerTrackers students during their internships and has previously spoken as part of a panel discussion at one of our Victorian program days. Our second presenter is Dominique Corbett, who's currently HR Manager at Westpac, a role he's held for over 4 years. Again, I'll let Dominique share his own story with you, but I'm proud to say that Dominique is an alumni of the CareerTrackers program, and we appreciate him sharing his experiences with us today as well. So Sonia, I might start with you. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to hear a bit of your background and your story of why and how you got into the profession.
Okay. So hi everyone, Sonia Harvey. I'd too like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. So I'm on Wurundjeri country and the land of the nations, more where I live and work. But I am a Kamilaroi woman from Tamworth, New South Wales. But I've pretty much lived in Melbourne since I was about 3. So lots of family actually down here now, but still quite a lot of family back up in Tamworth. And we're actually from a place outside of Tamworth, more remote than Tamworth, about an hour outside of Tamworth, called Nundle, which is a extremely beautiful country. So anyone that knows New South Wales or that area, it's a really beautiful country. So really happy to be on the call. A bit of background about this. My journey is I studied social work at uni. Weirdly, that I'm in HR. It's been an interesting pathway. So I sort of got into it in a really convoluted way. I tend to like to never do anything as a direct path. Just quickly, I left school in about year 9. I was dead set on becoming a hairdresser. I was like, if that happens, I'm set. My life's set. I wanted acrylic nails. I wanted to be a hairdresser. And back then, this will show my age, I wanted to drive a Nissan Exa. And probably a lot of you do not know what it is even. And so they were my goals at about, 16, 17. But I did become a bit of a hairdresser. So I did halfway through my apprenticeship of hairdressing, and then there was a subject called community or communications, and that was about body language, relating to people, talking to people, and I really liked that subject. So learning about how people tick, what they think, why they think it. So then decided to study social work. I didn't realise I had to go to uni to do that. I just decided I was going to do it. And then had to go back to TAFE and do a year 11 to 12, and I did that working part-time and also at night to complete that. And then after that, went and studied social work at uni and did a double degree in social work and arts. Worked as a social worker, attended DHHS, child protection, and worked in government for over 20 years in those sorts of roles. And then in that time, during that time in government, started holding more Aboriginal participation roles, looking at cultural safety, looking at increasing that Aboriginal workforce in those areas, so in child protection, in government in general, and that sort of led to a passion to pursue more of the HR diversity and inclusion type stream. So I think two of the reasons that it led me to social work probably weren't the right reasons for me. So I think because I'd been through a fair bit of stuff that DHS deal with and all of that sort of stuff as a kid, I thought, oh, I'll be the best person in my career as an adult. But actually what I found is that made it quite hard to do those sorts of jobs because I had that experience myself. I thought it would help me, but it actually made it quite hard. And so realised I could make a lot of difference moving into the D&I stream in terms of just really diversifying the workforce. So that's where I ended up. BP, I've been there a year. It's my first job outside of government or any sort of institution like that. So, and it's been amazing, but yeah, that's how I got there. So not a straight path, but really happy where I've landed at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it just highlights, Sonia, that it very rarely is a straight path, but yeah, certainly an interesting one. And I don't know if I ever wanted to be a hairdresser myself, but I'm hoping that one of my kids will, and that they'll do my hair every day. Don't like my chances.
I've got 2 boys, so my skills are completely wasted at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Dominique, if you are happy to share some of your story and what's attracted you to HR and how you've ended up in your current role.
Great, thanks Sharon. Hi everyone, my name's Dom Corbett. I'm here in Sydney. I'm a Kamilaroi man as well. I'm very proud to be a Kamilaroi man. I came through the CareerTrackers program in 2011, so a very long time ago now. It feels like yesterday, but it is a very long time ago, and the program's changed massively. When I first joined, there were probably 10 students nationwide as part of the program. And obviously now you see there's 45 people on the call plus hundreds more in different cities and towns around Australia, which is absolutely fantastic. Interestingly, my dad's actually a hairdresser. So I've actually got a hairdresser in the family, an official hairdresser in the family. So I'm very, very lucky to get free haircuts whenever I so choose to. I got into HR because I was at uni. I was studying a business degree, which is quite generic for anyone who's studying a business degree. And I was sort of trying to work out, okay, what am I going to do when I finish uni? And I didn't really like things like accounting, economics, finance. wasn't into it at all. I liked talking to people, and I liked to understand different people and their characters and what makes them tick. And that on its own was what sort of drove me towards the HR field. I was really lucky through CareerTrackers to get an opportunity to intern at Westpac back in the day, and I'm still now at Westpac today. So I've held a large number of roles. My path isn't nearly as interesting as Sonia's in terms of having all this different life experience. My path's quite boring. It's very much uni and then getting into a role which I've sort of diversified while there, but it's still fairly consistent. I've done a large number of different roles at Westpac in the HR space. So I've worked in the diversity inclusion space. I've worked in what we call our generalist space, which is helping our business leaders make decisions on how to run their organizations. I've done things specializing in our performance and reward frameworks. So helping Westpac decide how we pay people and who we should be paying and how we should be attracting candidates, etc. And I'm currently working in a new space, which is transforming the way that Westpac operates, so making it what we call a more agile workforce and an agile organization. So as you enter your organization, it's probably a buzzword you'll start hearing more and more, as it's very common these days. But that's what my role is currently focusing on. It's how do we move Westpac from the way we've always done things, which is quite old school, traditional, into the future to the way we want it to run, to make it more efficient going forward.
Yeah, and really timely for right now while we're all working agilely.
Exactly. And that's the thing. So we done all this. It's actually quite interesting. We've done all this training for our workforce just prior to sort of the coronavirus hitting, which helps set them up to understand how to work remotely and how to use all these online tools, etc. And it's very lucky we did, because if we didn't do it, we would have had a workforce of people who, they're not like most people on this call who are well versed in this technology and use it for their personal life all the time. They're people that don't know how to use these things, and it would have been quite a disaster. It's ended up being relatively successful.
Yeah, awesome. And Dominic, with all of that, I guess, broad generalist experience and exposure you've had, do you have a favourite function?
Yeah. So when I say generalist experience, it refers to the way it works at Westpac is you support a certain business area and a certain part of the bank. So for a long time, I supported the technology function, so the IT function, which I found really interesting, because IT is, as an HR practitioner, IT is one of the most rapidly changing parts of any organization, or it's creating completely new organizations, which gives opportunities to work in. I found it really interesting. So it was literally over 3 years, it would just be completely different. You're transforming the way it works. You're creating new roles. You're stopping doing sorts of work. You're dealing with outsourced suppliers in India, and you're trying to work out which roles suit best their workforces versus our workforces internally, and etc. So it's a really interesting place to work.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, we might get stuck into our agenda. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences with us. The first area we wanted to talk about is, why is this profession important and where's it going? So, Sonia, I might start with you. What would society look like without HR and diversity, and what's the impact on society going to have on HR and diversity going forward?
Yeah, I think the first word that came to mind when I was thinking what society would look like without this role is one-dimensional. I think that, it would just be a very flat, most people thinking similarly, most people looking the same, acting the same. And it probably, another thing I thought about is probably Australia 1970.
Yeah.
Maybe is what. Because I feel like we have come from a place where society at one point, especially me growing up, like it wasn't very diverse. Well, I didn't feel like it was very diverse, and I grew up in Frankston, and those who live in Victoria or close know Frankston, and I mean, all of the Aboriginal families lived in one street in the Housing Commission area of Frankston North. And then there was everyone else. And I would hate to go back to that time where you would look around and actually not see people that look like you, act like you, that you could identify with. Plus even if they're not the same as you, like just be able to look at someone and go, that's amazing. I couldn't imagine that experience. Your experience is so different to mine. And just having all those levels of input that make us, better, well-rounded people. And And I mean, even now, I look at BP as a company, and they've got, especially in Australia, they've got a long way to go. And I look at some of our refineries, and I look at our office space, and I look at our brand like Castrol, and I look at the representation of different gender, for example, is a real struggle and something we have to keep working on for our refineries and operational roles. And also just looking at the diversity, that there's people that have been in those roles for 45 years, and I can't wait until we sort of out with the old and in with the new, not literally speaking, but in terms of the values and the representation. I just, a world to me where there's lots of, and cultural backgrounds. It's just amazing, just that diversity and what we can gain from each other and what we can give to each other. So yeah, one-dimensional is what probably I think of without diversity.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I agree. So that HR departments at big organizations like BP and Westpac, but even small organizations, play a key role in challenging the way the business will otherwise operate. So a business leader is focused on, depending on the organization, but it's normally focused on generating profits and supporting their employees to develop. That's two key things that they're trying to do, as well as providing whatever service that they're doing. So whatever they do as an organization, they're trying to provide a service. Now, when those are the three key focuses for someone, if you're a CEO of an organization or a senior leader of an organization, it's very easy to be sort of swept up, and that's what you're focusing on all the time. And that's the only thing you'd ever be thinking about, is how to deliver your service and deliver profits for your organization. So what an HR department plays, whether you're in a generalist role or a more specialty role, like a diversity and inclusion role, is it allows a seat at the table to challenge that way of thinking and inject some additional things for the leadership teams to consider. Corporate social responsibility has come so far in the last 15, 20 years. Even since I've been working at Westpac in the last 8 years, we take things like diversity just so much more seriously than we did before. We have strict targets in place. We want to achieve certain things so we can sort of prove the value that we're adding, which I think, having a target around something might add a bit of a stigma, but at the same time, it helps focus the organization that this is as important to the organization as a financial target would be, which is also really important. So for me, anyone studying HR, looking to move into an HR role, and that's a very broad range of what that could be, has the opportunity to influence whatever they're doing, which a lot of people in other roles wouldn't have the opportunity to do. So a lot of other people in other roles, they go to work and they receive tasks and they complete their tasks and they go home. The HR department, its role is to think about things differently, to stay in the forefront of what's happening in society and challenge the organization to change as we go through things.
Yeah, awesome. And how would you say that the profession has helped you personally, Dominique?
So personally, you learn. So I think you learn the gift of the gab. So you learn how to talk to people. So a major part of the role is you're constantly talking to people. You're constantly having to listen to someone's issue a lot of the time, and that could be that. Again, that's a really broad statement. It could be any issue relating to anything, but you're listening to someone's issue and you're trying to find a solution. It's very different to when you're working with numbers and it's a very black and white answer. This is, we need to achieve this number. How do we achieve that number? You're dealing with people. Your decisions you make can completely have a broad range of outcomes. You can say, in this situation, this is the reason we're going to go hard on this situation and be quite strict and really be serious about it. Or we need to be loose and actually go, sorry, my phone just beeped because I said serious. Or you could be saying, we need to go softer on this, or we could be saying, this is what we need for our workforce for now, or it doesn't work for our workforce for now. So you learn how to quickly deal with ambiguous situations that come up in your life. You learn how to be able to respond to someone saying something to you quickly, because that's your job. Your job is to be able to respond to something and deal with something quickly, which is, I think, a really key life skill, which a lot of people lack.
Yeah. Awesome. Sonia, would you add anything different to that? Helped you?
How this profession's probably helped me personally is it gives me a sense of power. So I feel like, you know, if I think about a personal story, and, you know, I think about when my dad was younger, and especially in remote or sort of rural New South Wales, and thinking about those times, and when he used to go to school, he was allowed to go to the school, but he had to sit on the outside of the classroom, not on the inside. And that was really common for a lot of Aboriginal kids. And I think about inclusion, and I think about the real reason behind inclusion. I think about situations like that. And it's not just important to say, okay, we're including these people now, or these roles exist because people have been excluded. But it's just about also the participation and what people have to add. And it just makes me, there's a real personal drive, I think, through doing this role, to know that what it is like to be excluded. And because of your race or your background, that you feel like you can't contribute to things, or you're not part of things. And I feel like there's real power in a D&I role to actually influence business and say, this is not good enough. The people you have here, it's not good enough. The way you're representing diversity, it's not good enough. And that, you know, that diversity part is one thing, but then the inclusion part is another. And I think, personally for me, it gives me a real sense of power to fulfill something, and injustice that I feel like I'm finally having a role in setting right.
Yeah, awesome. Got a few questions coming through. Sonia, might just stick with you for the time being. What has been the biggest achievement that BP and Westpac, Dom, have had within the diversity space?
Without sounding like I'm just talking about myself, so hiring me was one of the big things. No, but seriously, BP, up until a year ago, so they had a few things in place. They had a wrap. They had targets around Aboriginal employment and workforce and things like that. But literally, I feel like, to be honest, when I joined, they were targets and things on paper. And I read things in old raps that were around acknowledgement to country, why it was important, all of these sorts of things. And yet all of the meetings I was in the first few months, no one did it. There was no mention. It was like these things existed on paper, but they didn't exist in reality. So I guess the biggest achievement that I've seen actually for BP at the moment is moving from ideas and you know, nice to have things to action. And we've got a new COO who's actually French, but his sense of like why this role is important is phenomenal. Like, he really gets it. And so I think one of the biggest achievements now is our leadership group is on board. So they are requesting, they want information all of the time. Our COO won't start a meeting, even an international meeting, without acknowledging First People, traditional owners, and then acknowledges all of the traditional owners across the world. Because of the stuff we've done internally. So I think I'm really proud of our leadership group. Our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, she runs the RAP committee. And we've actually now gone from low-level interaction, low-level backing, to all of our senior leadership group saying this is important and holding each other accountable for it, especially our COO. So I think that's a massive shift. One other thing, that achievement for BP would be Opal Fuel. I don't know if a lot of you know about Opal Fuel. So that's a low odor petrol fuel. So that was done in response to the issues of petrol sniffing. And so there was a letter written to BP to say, in these communities, this is a real issue in terms of our young people and, what they have access to and what they're doing with fuels and things like that. So in response to that, BP could have said, look, we make the fuel, it's not our responsibility what people do with it, we can't control that. But instead they went and made a low aromatic fuel that actually can't be inhaled. So, things like that, that's actually gone, we could just shun this and go, that's not our problem. Or we could say there actually is things we can do in this space to reduce. I mean, there's other issues that come with that, but the actual deadly thing about, sniffing fuel, at least that was taken out of the equation. Yeah. So I'm really proud of that move as well.
Yeah, awesome. Dominique, I might actually just mix up the question for you. What do you believe is the biggest misconception about HR?
Okay, so I'd say the biggest misconception about HR is we're here to hire and fire people. That's what people think of when they think about an HR department. Oh, you're the people that hire people for roles, and you're the people that fire people when they do something bad. That's never been part of my role. I don't really hire or fire anyone. And I've worked in HR for now 8 years, but it's still not really part of my role. There's been instances where you have to get involved in that when there's sort of serious issues or whatever, but in general, it's not really part of my role. I think it's a misconception because people just don't understand. Most employees wouldn't see the value or wouldn't understand what's happening in an HR department. And that's because HR departments usually are dealing with your more senior leadership team, trying to influence the way the organization's heading, which I think is a really good thing. We might not be, I don't think we're necessarily the people department, that traditional people department that they used to be, which would have been very much involved in the hiring, firing, supporting employees with what's going on. That's still an aspect of HR that does that, but it's really transformed into more of an influential, changing the way the organization's heading type function.
Yeah, awesome. We are getting a couple of questions through, so I might save some of them for a little bit later on, just so we can keep moving through our subjects, but I haven't forgotten about them. Just moving on to barriers to success in the profession. Dominique, I might start with you. What is the hardest aspect of the job, would you say? And do you have a personal story that you would be happy to share about a time where perhaps you considered leaving?
Okay, so I'd say that the hardest aspect of the role is that a lot of the things that you try to do is a slow burn. So it's not as simple as just saying, we should do this now, this is the way we should run something or change something, and that's all of a sudden that everyone's going to listen to you and try to just do what you're saying. It's a slow burn to get change implemented in an organization. It's a slow burn to change the way an organization runs its operations. And that's understandable. I mean, a lot of people on this call will be going into internships in really large organizations, really diverse organizations, but often very large organizations with a lot of employees. And it's easy to go, with the best intentions. I really want to change this really quickly. I see an issue, I see a gap, and I can see a solution to that and change it really quickly. It's really important for anyone going into one of these situations to try to really understand it is a slow burn. You need to influence, build recognition of your abilities to start having that opportunity to influence and change the way organizations run. I mean, one of the really good things, just back to the diversity, what the achievements to diversity, one of the really good things that Westpac's done is we have what we call our employee action groups. So one of the employee action groups is called the Brothers and Sisters Network, and that's an employee action group focused on Indigenous employment and supporting our Indigenous employees at Westpac, which I think is really fantastic. It's run by a group of Indigenous employees as well as a group of non-Indigenous employees who have an aspiration to see that Indigenous employment improve for our organisation. Things like that make a huge difference because it gives, and that's something. The reason I'm giving that example is it's something that people on this call could consider implementing in their organizations if something didn't exist similar. It's something quite easy to do, saying I'm going to be sort of the advocate for this space if it doesn't exist already, and I'm going to try to and have that influential role at the organization, which could help you in your career prospects as well, as an aside. In terms of leaving, I've never really felt like leaving, because I've just sort of tried to, I've stayed close to people I work with closely, my mentors, to try to understand, situations and why things are happening and how I should respond to them. So I've just sort of tried to deal with it in that way when I've felt down. There's frustrations in every job that you don't have the best week or the best month or the best year. But I've tried to just make sure I'm reaching out to the right people to help me through those situations.
Yeah, awesome. Sonia, what barriers are there you would say are within a person's control, and barriers that are perhaps outside of an individual's control?
I think some of the barriers that are outside of your control to some degree are people's perceptions and attitudes to some point. But then again, I always feel like those people for me are my biggest challenge. I almost target those people in terms of feeling like, so how they feel and what they think now is out of my control, but what they will think in the future and how they will think in the future is within my control. So I feel like one of the biggest things you need to get used to in a D&I role is hearing the word no. You hear it a lot. But I think the way I've grown up, I really am used to hearing the word no. And I've always seen it as, right, so if I can't go direct, I have to find a way to go around this obstacle. It doesn't mean for me that I stop. So one of my biggest strategies joining BP was, like I said, to align myself with the leadership team. I basically didn't worry about anyone else in the organisation. To be honest, I needed to create relationships with that team, because once I created relationships with that team, every time I got a no from someone else, it turned into a yes from the leadership team. So, and I think that's a really important thing. So you might not have control over things in a sense, but how you get control over those things is up to you. So, and I've always been like that. I've always had that attitude. Whenever I feel like there's a blocker, it's highly motivating. So I think you have to have that grit. You have to be the sort of person who won't be put off by someone shutting a door in your face, because it happens all of the time. And just because you think something is a good idea, it doesn't mean the rest of the company will think it's a good idea. So you really have to put your mind to, how do I make people think that they think it's a good idea? So, you know, people don't like to be told that something's good, but they like to feel like they came to that point on their own. Yeah. And the skill is them not realizing you drove them to that outcome.
Yes, absolutely. We've got some questions. One of them one of the students saying that, you know, that idea of filling quotas when it comes to hiring for diversity. And, you know, some people have met with that response, there's an assumption or a feeling that they're hired just because they're Aboriginal or just because they're female. How do you respond to that? And, you know, how do you recruit for the right person whilst filling those sorts of targets?
So I might just jump in. So a lot of what we try to do is we try to, so there's a thing called unconscious bias that people naturally have. So what we try to do is we hold my organization holds unconscious bias trainings with hiring managers. Unconscious bias isn't targeting a specific race or a gender or anything. It's a general unconscious bias that you say someone come into an interview with you and you look at them and you go, oh, something about them that isn't aligned to me personally. The biggest danger that we would teach a leader is surrounding yourself with the same person as they are, because that is just not efficient. You're just gonna have a bunch of people agreeing with each other, which doesn't make sense. So what I've tried to influence leaders and teach them over the years is, you need to have employees that reflect your customer base, and your customer base is diverse. So you need to accept the fact that not all of your customers are going to be middle-aged white males, because that's just a fact. You're going to have a broad customer base from every single background that you can imagine, especially in Australia. You need to have a diverse set of employees, because they will tell you what your customers will be thinking. And I think that sort of gets people to go, oh yeah, that actually does kind of make more sense than just being told to fill a quota, because there is a stigma around the quota. But the quota also helps organizations. I see the value in them, because I think, and I don't call them quotas, I call them targets. I see the value in a target because I think it helps keep an organization focused on a non-financial goal. And the way the organizations run is they have targets in place for everything. It's not only about people, it's about every single aspect of the way the organization runs. So I think I see the target around people as just being an aspect of that. Some people won't agree with that, and that's fine. That's my sort of personal perspective on it.
Sonia, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just, as Dominic was talking, I was just thinking that one of the things I try and get our staff to, when they're hiring, is to think about things like gender and diversity as a skill set. So don't see it as, okay, here's the skill set of someone, oh good, and they're also Indigenous, brilliant. Like, don't see it as separate things. So when you're looking at a skill set, say great, they're IT, you know, that they're across all the IT stuff they need to be, they've had X number of experience, and they're also Indigenous, brilliant. These things are a skill base. So not just seeing it as an add-on or something that's an extra bonus, but, and then going, because they're Indigenous, what skills will that bring? Or because they're a woman, what skills does that bring to this role that we don't currently have in this role or in this organisation? So I hear that a lot from my managers. I don't want to just hire because it's a woman. I'm hiring because it's the best person for the job. And so my response to that is always, well, you've got 10 people that look like this that are great for the job. So if you want the best person for this job, you need to think about, if they're a woman, a different skill set they bring versus, you know, the 10 other people that look the same. So I think moving away from seeing it as an add-on to actually a skill. When you have that life experience as a woman, when you have that life experience as an Indigenous person or anything else, you're bringing something to the role that someone else can't. And so I think that's an important thing to remember around seeing it as a skill. And I was going to say something else as well. What was the question that we were answering again? What did you, Sharon?
About the filling quota as opposed to the right person for the right role whilst doing, like,
right.
Think about those.
That was the other thing I was going to say. So one of the things we're implementing in our retail sites, so our petrol stations, is, you've seen them, they're very green and white, they all look pretty much the same other than our David Jones sites. And so working on a project at the moment where we are looking to put the Aboriginal Australia languages map in all of our sites so people can see actually the different borders and boundaries that were in place before the state boundaries, and then highlight the traditional language groups of the area in which that the service station or retail is there. We're also wanting to do some sort of commission artwork from that state to wrap around poles and do things in our sites that are actually way more representative of being in Australia, and the communities that are represented here. And so, you know, people come to me and say, I'm so excited, we're doing the artwork, we're putting the map, it's fantastic. And I say, great, if you're doing those things, what is your Indigenous population where you are? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, okay, you need to find that out. And if your Indigenous population is X, what employment targets then do you have for that population? Now you're doing all these pretty things in your site and you're making it look lovely and you're representing the Aboriginal community in that way. How are you really going to represent the Aboriginal community in your site with employment, with participation? And then they actually have a bit of a light bulb and realise that the actual tokenistic stuff is the start. It's definitely not the end point. So I think quotas are good at reminding us that that's where we need to head, but people need to link the fun stuff and the lovely creative stuff like NAIDOC Week, Rec Week, all of that stuff to real life, what we're trying to achieve in this area. So yeah, I think when we can always couple those things, we've got a better chance of actually having, you know, stuff that's more meaningful.
Yeah, and we actually have a question around, you know, acknowledgement of country and NAIDOC celebrations. And, you know, sometimes there's a sense that it's being done to pay lip service or to tick a box. And how do you address attitudes like that in your position?
So one of the things we recently did in Reconciliation Week this year is I did a huddle. So it was more than 250 people from across the BP that joined the call, and it was more of a personal story about background and what reconciliation means to me in my role. But it was also about broadening that, and I showed a video on racism, and I got people to talk about what is racism and what is being racist, what is racism, and what is anti-racist versus non-racist. And so let's have a discussion about that. If we're going to have Rec Week, let's have a discussion about the reason behind Rec Week. And people loved it. I don't know if anyone's seen the clip. There's a New Zealander of the Year, I forget his name. He's in lots of movies, and he talks about what you can do to racism. And it's like a reverse take on racism, and it's talking about you just need to give a little bit to racism for it to continue and thrive. You don't need to do much, just be a little bit racist, it's fine. And just to see our BP stuff, watch that and take that in and think about what they do in their jobs, and it actually isn't the big either work toward reconciliation or not. I think that's the things that stop it being. So there's having deeper conversations with people about more serious things other than just like let's talk about Aboriginal things.
Yeah, awesome. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to move to the next section, which is ingredients for excellence in the profession. I just wanted to talk about, or get you guys to talk about, traits and characteristics that you think are really important for the role. And what I'll do, I'll share my screen and put up, a lot of you will be familiar with our graduate attributes that we talk a lot about with our interns. And perhaps if Dominique and Sonia, if you can chat about the ones that you think are most important for HR and diversity roles, and let's see if I can work my technology. Look at that. So Dominique, did you want to go first in terms of this?
Sure.
Framework? What do you think is really important in a role such as yours?
Sure, no worries. So the key column for me on this one will be the communication column. A lot of what, as I said earlier, a lot of what we do is respond to situations and be able to talk things through and be able to explain a point of view to a leader which might not necessarily agree with that point of view. So influencing that situation is a really key skill, and it's not something that anyone will have naturally when they go into a role. It's something that you'll build and understand more and more about as you go through situations, and as you go into conversations and you see how they don't work, or you see how you don't get your point of view across in the way that you would have liked to. You'll slowly learn about tricks or ways in your own mind how that could have gone differently, and how you would approach it in the next time you had the opportunity to do so. So it's hard to sort of give a tangible example to that, but I think it's one of those things that really is about practicing them, getting yourself into situations where you can try to influence others and seeing how you go and learning what worked well for you and what didn't work well for you. The other piece I would say is being self-motivated. So it's on the sort of personal leadership side of things. I think being self-motivated and it's almost curious in the HR profession is really important. Curious about what's happening in the industry, curious about what you could do differently, curious about what you could learn from your peers. So the CareerTrackers network is a really good example of there's a whole bunch of people on this call who are working in a similar field or studying a similar field. What are they doing in their organizations? What are they trying? What's gone well for them? What's not gone well for them? And how could you potentially use some of that to influence your own organization? I think having those skills and being able to sort of lean on your network to learn about how you could do better, I think is a really key attribute.
Awesome. Sonia, what would you add to that?
I'm sort of all across the different columns. And I think, so I've highlighted, I'm just going to read through them really quickly. I'm not going to say why really, but just sum them up. So I think takes responsibility is really important. Able to adapt to change, and like I said, if you hear no in one way, you just find another way. So you basically need to be flexible and not just say, but this is my plan, and you can't, I don't have any other plan. Driven, you have to remain motivated, you have to remain driven, because it can feel like you are hitting lots of brick walls at times. Develops relationships, like I said earlier, not just develop relationships, because I think you can do that with everyone, but develop the right relationships. So the relationships that are going to be the ones that will get you to where you need to be. And I'm not saying make them fake or anything like that, but really see, that domino effect. If I influence this person, how many more people in their sphere will they influence? I think shows appreciation is really important. I think a lot of people will come to me in this space and be very nervous about an acknowledgement, or what do they do here, or they don't know much about employing Indigenous people, and they're really scared, to be honest. And I think just showing appreciation, they've come to me, they want to have a discussion, and being open to that, I think goes a long way, and they're more likely to do more, ask more, be an advocate. Staying professional at all times, I think too, and not, I know this sounds really basic, but not having tantrums when you don't get your own way. And I think it's really good to think about being graceful in terms of, so you still might have your inner plan and know that you are going to get the outcome that you want, but being graceful and showing appreciation for that person's involvement, if it's not what you want, and then move on to the next person who will get you what you want, and empowers others. So I think always thinking about making people feel like they can do this and that they don't need to come to me all of the time. They actually know the stuff. They know what's right and what's wrong. So empowering them to make it.
Awesome. Thank you. There's some really good points there. One of the other things, I'm just going to tie this into one of the questions that we've had. I wanted to talk about the sort of degrees and qualifications needed to get into HR, and I think you've sort of demonstrated that it doesn't necessarily have to be an HR degree. But one of our students is a graduating student with a psychology degree, and she's been applying for grad roles in HR and getting a lot of feedback from organisations saying they want people with direct HR experience and or an HR degree. And what's your advice in terms of how she should approach that? Is it about demonstrating those transferable skills she has picked up from other roles, or what's your advice to her?
I think maybe going for roles that have a HR element, but maybe aren't HR roles. So, you know, very similar to me, social work degree. But so in government, I did things like in the Aboriginal inclusion branch, for example. So it was more around social inclusion. There was elements of employment targets and things like that, but it was more policy, social influence type role with sort of some HR or target outcomes attached to it. So maybe look for roles that sort of sit in between the social and the inclusion type things and get your experience in there, and then use that to move into more of a HR type generalist role. But that would be my advice, and that gave me actually a lot of good experience to not only move into HR but to bring the broader holistic view into the HR space as well. But I know they probably will look at psych and go, hold on, this is a HR role. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised because psych's actually a really common degree that at Westpac we would look at for an HR grad role. So I mean, it's a shame that you're having that experience. Whoever asked that question, what I would say is, to further to Sonja's point, is there's a lot of HR roles that are very. There's no one who's an expert in them. So things like, I mean, I'm going to look at Westpac internally. We've got a health and safety team. So they look at our employee health and safety. There's no one no one really comes into a junior role in health and safety and has had experience in that. You can't really study. You can't go and study a health and safety degree, an HR degree. It's not a thing, right? So looking for people who've got some sort of broad experience, who are interested in the field, to come and join those roles. And I think there's probably a lot of roles like that where you can't directly study this specific stream of HR. You need to get on the job experience. So if you've got a personal interest in it and you can sort of portray that and show how you personally are interested or have a background which is aligned to that, then that would be really useful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I might just move on to our last section, just conscious again of time. How can students accelerate their success? So, Dominique, I might start with you. If you can, any personal experiences that have been beneficial, such as an internship or mentoring or attending certain events, that sort of thing. And what, if it is an internship, what sort of experiences should they be seeking out?
Yeah. So you're all doing a really good job because you're all on the call and you're all interested in trying to learn about what's going on out there, which is a good first step and a good example of what you should be doing. What I would say is, in terms of how to best place yourself. So yes, an internship is a really good way. And I think most people here would have the opportunity to conduct an internship as part of the Career Trackers program, which is fantastic. If not, you should probably look at sort of joining the Career Trackers program and seeing whether or not you can get such a similar opportunity in the future. Once you're in an organization, you don't have much immediate say about, oh, this is what I want to go and do in the organization. But what I would say is go and learn about how the different departments in HR or just the organization in general operate. So go and learn how they all operate. Learn about what you're interested in. And if you see something that you're really interested in, or see something that sort of sparks your intrigue, then reach out to the person who works in that space and try to get across what they do, how it works, how you could maybe come back at a future uni break and conduct and work with them or get some more experience with them. But it is really, it's hard before you join the workforce to understand how diverse the HR job family field actually is. So until you're actually sort of in an organization, you're seeing how it operates, it's really hard. And I would just say, just get out there and talk to people that are doing things that look like you would like doing and learn about it.
Yeah. Sonia, I might just add to that in terms of what sort of resources are out there that students could be using? Like, are there professional journals or websites that they should be looking at, or specific associations that they should perhaps look to join to sort of help them, whether it's building that network or getting more knowledge?
For me, it's not so much professional associations or anything like that, but I look for, I guess, webinars or TED Talks or things that I'm interested in. And I'm always sort of doing that self-development of, whether it's about diversity or inclusion and that sort of space. But also for me personally, as a woman in this space, I'm always looking for things around how to develop as a woman in this space, how to be seen, how to be heard, and how to be comfortable with public speaking, how to be comfortable with talking about yourself. And I think for not just some women, but just some people in general, that's a really uncomfortable thing to do. And it's been uncomfortable for me for a lot of years. But I feel like, now I'm reflecting back in my mid-year career conversation, and I just said to my boss, great, this has been great, but these are the things I want to do now, X, Y, and Z in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think that's something now I'm comfortable doing, but it takes a while. So to accelerate where you want to be and what skills and resources, I would say the personal development stuff, as much as the professional stuff, will go a long way to get you ahead of the game.
Yeah. And just a question for you, Sonia. You talked about, having those conversations or developing not just relationships, but relationships with the right people. One of the questions we've had is, how do you build your confidence in talking to those higher managerial positions that you might be normally intimidated by to make those positive changes?
So for me, I have to find I have to start on a personal level. So it pretty much, I feel like a bit of a stalker, but sometimes when we were back in the real world and in real offices, if I knew I needed to target some particular person because they have a level of influence that I need, I would literally wait till they were in the tea room or wait till they were in the lift and stuff like that, where I had an opportunity to have random conversations around things like kids or common stuff. So not just like, hey, I need to talk to you about the Reconciliation Action Plan, or hey, we need to do more about Indigenous inclusion, but it's more like, here we go, another weekend with with my kids and whatever. So I think finding common things where you can start that thread and then build on that thread to get where you need to be. So not starting where you need to start, basically, starting where you have to start. Yeah. And I think trying to get yourself invited to things so people can see you. So you might not get a chance to find these leaders one-on-one, but if you can be like, hey, I would love to listen into the chat on reconciliation, or I would love to offer you, either a question and answer session around reconciliation if I can help, and just go in for those little tiny wins and get yourself in front of people. And then all of a sudden you'll find that the next person they think about when they want to grow their inclusion or do anything in that space, they know you, they've seen you, they'll invite you. So would be my how to get those relationships. It's quite a sort of a bit of a subtle art to sort of stalk people until they know.
Yeah. The subtle art of stalking. Maybe there's a
TED Talk in that.
A TED Talk on that.
Can I say one quick thing on that? So I was just going to say, if you're just trying to approach someone just to network with them and just build a relationship, don't try to oversell what you're there for. So you're not there to change their lives and add all this amazing stuff. You're there to learn from them and to understand what they do. So just making sure you're really clear that this is how I am. Yes, I've got this much experience, or I'm at uni, or whatever it may be. I'm just interested in what you do and how it works. I think people like that. People are like, oh, that's cool. I can sort of lend my knowledge to that. That's a good thing for me to do.
Yeah, it's being genuine and sort of thing. We're just right on 1 o'clock now. I'm just going to share with you all in the chat an evaluation form, which would be great if you could fill that out before you leave us. But thank you all for joining us. Dominic and Sonia, is there anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
Not really, just thank you all for coming, and even though I can't see everyone's face, I know that you're there, and hopefully it's been useful. And I don't know, every time I do anything like this, I just get so inspired and excited that this is the talent coming through, and I just can't wait to coach you all. So
yeah, great. Thanks for having us, and thanks for the opportunity. It's been really fun, interesting.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know it's a really busy time of year. It's been amazing to hear your insights and your experiences, and it's been really valuable. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your time. Hope you all have a great Friday and a lovely weekend.
Happy Friday. See you guys.
Bye.
See ya.